Yesterday on our show, Congressman Louis Gohmert joined us, and one thing he told me I did not know, we're going to get around talking about the first five topic in a moment, but one thing he told me I did not know was that when President Obama realized that there was not going to be, at least at that time, a President Hillary Clinton, one of the very conscious steps he and his underlings took was to change the status of hundreds and maybe thousands of people in Washington who supported his agenda, who were part of the political appointment class. And so their relationship with the government was appointment only, meaning the president or some other person in power could remove them from their employment immediately. They were not employees with the protection of civil service. President Obama transitioned hundreds, and I think he said thousands of people in Washington who were committed to the radical Obama agenda and moved them from political appointment status to employee status with the goal of making these people harder to remove. Make it harder for President Trump, as he came on board in January 2017, to put forth the agenda that he ran on. So President Trump runs into troubles in Washington when he is trying to move his agenda forward, even within the White House. As you heard, if you didn't hear yesterday, you should go back and listen to the interview yesterday with Congressman Louis Gohmert, but making the point that it's very difficult for President Trump to do many things he wants to do because he's surrounded by people who are longtime political types, longtime left-wingers, supporter of the left-wing agenda of President Obama, and they remained in the administration, in the White House, in the Department of Justice, in the Department of State, all over the federal government. One term often used to describe these people is deep state, just the basic idea that they're there to push forward their agenda. They do not care what the agenda is of the president, who is supposed to be the commander-in-chief and the head of the executive branch. They don't really care that it was the agenda that he ran on that the American people liked and voted for. It's why he won the presidency. So you have this happening in Washington. I had not realized that had happened, but with the first five today, I called it the Orchestrated Barr Brawl, and Barr, B-A-R-R, is referring to Attorney General Barr. It's the same kind of thing, and I want to point out something we didn't get to yesterday with Louis Gohmert, but it relates to the ongoing battle in Washington related to the Attorney General and the Department of Justice. In short, as we went over yesterday, when the four lawyers filed a pleading, the four Department of Justice lawyers filed their sentencing recommendation with the court in the case of Roger Stone and recommended 7 to 9 years as prison time for Roger Stone. That was a direct contradiction to the agreement that had been made internally inside the Department of Justice for high-level cases like this. This decision that those four lawyers made was inconsistent with the marching orders they had received as a result of the high-level discussion in the Department of Justice about what to recommend for Roger Stone's sentencing. In short, the Department of Justice, the people in charge, had decided, and actually Attorney General Barr wasn't part of this, but they had decided that the recommendation from the Department of Justice should simply be whatever the court thinks is right. Leave it in the discretion of the court, the judge. And so these four lawyers decided, we don't really care, because who their loyalty is to Obama, the leftists, the deep state mindset, and they just weren't about to listen to the Attorney General and the superiors at the Department of Justice. So because of that episode, and then Attorney General Barr stepped in and said, wait a minute, that's not what we agreed on. We agreed, so they withdrew that sentencing recommendation and submitted a revised one, and to essentially say to the court what the DOJ superiors had already decided, which is, in this case, we're going to ask the court to use its own discretion. I'm reminding you of those details because I want to get around then to where we are. In Washington right now, and among the ruling elite Democrat media mob, there is hysteria in Washington about the idea that Attorney General Barr has allegedly shown his true colors, that he really is not there to administer justice. He's really not there to apply the rule of law. He is there to do whatever Donald Trump says he should do, and he's there to protect Donald Trump and his affiliates, his colleagues, his people who find themselves under the scrutiny of the Department of Justice. So The entire thing is getting blown up in Washington and in the media, and the left-wing media and in the elite ruling class circles. This momentum is building that is pushing for Attorney General Barr to resign over this, and or to have the House consider this as a possible basis for yet another impeachment proceeding, at least against Attorney General Barr. In that position, he can be impeached. So an impeachment of Attorney General Barr, and or maybe even extending to President Trump. So one thing the media does when they decide that, they've got something they can go on, the leftists, the Democrat media mob in this country, they've got something they can go on. They can go on this, look what happened. Attorney General Barr interfered with the prosecution of a Trump associate, Roger Stone. And in the midst of all this, to be clear, President Trump tweeted that 7 to 9 years sounded like an awfully long sentence given what Stone was convicted for. What Attorney General Barr said in his interview was that they already made the decision inside the DOJ to not recommend any sentence, leave it to the judge. And he'd already become aware that the 4 attorneys who filed the pleading had asked for 7 to 9 years. He'd already decided that we have to intervene, the higher level of the Department of Justice, to say that's too much. So all of that had happened, and they had decided they're going to move forward and tell the court, no, actually ignore that previous filing by the 4, rogue lawyers. And this is, in fact, what the DOJ is recommending, which is no sentence recommendation at all from the DOJ. Getting to the point that this decision by Barr is being characterized as his being manipulated by Trump, and there's a movement toward either urging Attorney General Barr to resign or to be impeached. And I'm getting around to the same thing, the same mindset that is behind the scenes when Obama decided, once he realized there wasn't going to be a President Hillary Clinton, decided he was going to move these people from political positions where they could be terminated at will to employment positions protected by law so strident in Washington you can barely fire a government employee. The left thinks long term. They strategize. They orchestrate. They know what they're trying to do. They orchestrate. So back to Barr, what I wanted to say, and I know it's longer than my first 5, but I had to lay those pieces of the story down to get the point I want to make. There's been a story out that is now over 2,000 ex-employees of the Department of Justice have signed some petition, I guess it is, condemning Attorney General Barr with changing the Stone sentencing recommendation, the Roger Stone sentencing recommendation, and urging that he resign because his actions were so egregious. But as I tell you, the left is forever and a day. They orchestrate, they manipulate. Nothing you ever see out of the American left, take this to the bank, nothing you ever see out of the American left is due to honest, organic reaction. Everything about them is manipulation, contortion, misleading, deception, and often pre-planned. In this particular case, that organization that popped up and described itself, it was a group called Protect Democracy, and the left manages to think up all these happy-sounding names like Protect Democracy. This is a group, Protect Democracy, nice sounding as it is, and gee, you think it's the swellest thing ever. This is simply a left-wing front group created in early 2017, so long before anything happened with Barr and Stone and all of that. Created in early 2017 as part of an extensive anti-Trump operation managed by left-wing tech billionaire Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay. So a left-wing billionaire created Protect Democracy in early 2017, and they're the ones who rose up, and they were created just to be anti-Trump, to fight Trump at every step of the way, fight everything he does. So these people, funded by a billionaire, and I'll tell you in a moment who advises them, advised by other anti-Trump left-wingers, this is a group that tried to assert itself as this innocent, nonpartisan, do-good group, stepping up and saying, we've got to stop this, Attorney General Barr and President Trump are just running roughshod over the Constitution and over the role of the Department of Justice, and Attorney General Barr must resign. It is all left-wing money. Shouldn't surprise you, but it is worthy of keeping in mind when you recognize how effective groups like this and petitions like this are unless we call them out. People who have busy lives, I don't mean to imply Americans who aren't very bright. I just mean Americans who are busy, who have, a family and husband or wife and kids and a job and community commitments and all sorts of activities. They see a headline that says, oh yeah, Protect Democracy came out. 2,000 former Justice Department employees are all denouncing, wow, Barr must be a really bad guy after all. The left recognizes that the kinds of things they do actually are effective with some segment of America, some segment of the American population who isn't going to dive in and understand it's all just left-wing propaganda. They are not thinking there's anything wrong with Attorney General Barr actually saying that he expects the attorneys in the department who work for him, who have been told ahead of time, we're deciding on this approach in this case, who go rogue, ignore him, ignore the power structure in the DOJ, and go for the maximum sentence for a guy who, is just a minor player in the grand scheme of life. And nothing Roger Stone did, to be clear, nothing Roger Stone did had anything to do with the non-existent Trump-Russia collusion hoax. Nothing. Nothing. It's just someone Mueller was able to find. So I want to wrap up the first 5. Okay, so it's the first 15. There you go. I want to wrap up by saying it's really important in this election year, and as we look in 2020 moving forward, we have so many different things to be concerned about, to recognize how often the left uses this kind of tactic to mislead America. Actually, I do want to hit another couple points about this. So I'm not ending the first 5, but 2 more points about this. One is important to recognize that part of what the left is trying to do in attacking Attorney General Barr and trying to delegitimize him is to delegitimize, before it's even out, the results of the Durham investigation. U.S. Attorney Durham, assigned by Attorney General Barr to try to get at the root, the predicate, the genesis of the entire Trump-Russia collusion hoax. The left is scared out of their minds with the idea that Durham is actually going to come up with names, incidents, potential criminal charges, potential indictments against the cabal, and it's a large cabal inside the Department of Justice and the FBI that orchestrated the entire Trump-Russia collusion. That's where Durham is headed. That's his job. And if anything, the left hopes that they can, by this ongoing attempt to delegitimize Attorney General Barr, is to delegitimize the entire Durham investigation, whatever outcome we get from that. And one last thing I'm going to hit about this, since we're on this roll about Attorney General Barr and the Department of Justice, the other thing that should tell you that this left-wing hysteria over Barr's actions, which were completely appropriate, but Attorney General Barr's actions concerning the sentencing recommendation for Roger Stone, is when you think of the things that happened under U.S. Attorney Eric Holder, the U.S. Attorney for President Obama, the Attorney General Eric Holder under President Obama, when you recognize the things that he did that were ignored by the media, ignored by the press, ignored by the left-wing mob, because they're on the side, the left-wing mob is on the side of Obama and Holder. No such similar mob attack happened by the conservatives. Republicans, conservatives do not conduct themselves the way the left does. Many things happened under the Obama era, under Eric Holder as our Attorney General, that could have been the subject of a legitimate, attempt to move people to challenge Obama, to denounce Holder, to suggest maybe Holder should step down. The things that went on inside the Department of Justice under Holder that didn't get any such media hysteria as is now being generated by the Barr thing, I'll name just a few. Under Eric Holder, Fast and Furious, the gun running authorized by the Department of Justice gun running effort that got American manufactured guns into the hands of Mexican cartels and resulted in the death of a U.S. agent, in fact, several U.S. agents. That gun running operation, illegal and beside unethical and immoral, illegal, nothing happens. It was clear President Obama was aware of it. Eric Holder was fine with it. He conducted it. He ran it. Everything was fine. Nothing happens to him. Next example. President Obama said out loud numerous times, President Obama said he had no authority whatsoever via executive order to do anything about the DACA people, the people here in America who have no legal right to be here, but they were brought to America as small children, and they're in a little bit of a weird immigration limbo situation. President Obama said, I don't have the executive authority to do this, to say, I hereby give the DACA people citizenship, or I hereby give them a special status, or I hereby whatever. He said, I have no power to do anything about it. It requires Congress. So, but Holder himself, the Attorney General, the head of Obama's Department of Justice, urged him to use his executive power unconstitutionally, unjustifiably, to give status to the DACA people. Nobody called. And so this is, to be clear, the Attorney General urging the president to act in an unconstitutional manner, and he did it, and he executed on the unconstitutional executive order, and Republicans, as usual, sat on their hands, and nothing ever happened. There was not the mob that we have to look at whenever a conservative does something. Even when they do something right, the left-wing mob, left-wing Democrat media mob comes up with some way to attack. We also had Eric Holder and his Department of Justice completely dismiss the entire Lois Lerner Internal Revenue Service targeting of conservative groups. I mean, blatantly discriminating against conservative political groups. None of that resulted in a demand that Holder should resign. None of that resulted in Holder should be impeached. None of that. And I just want to keep those examples in mind when somebody tells you, keep those facts in mind and those examples in mind, when someone tells you that Attorney General Barr needs to go. I'm sorry, folks, Barr is doing his job, frankly, brilliantly. And that is my first 5, which is really first 20, but there you go. It's what I have, it's a funny thing, actually, a good thing on my show. When I don't have a guest, I'm a little more, I mean, it still is my show, and I don't have commercial breaks, so I can just talk as long as I want anything. And I do recognize, I kind of like the idea of first 5 and keeping it to first 5, but I really wanted to hit those points today in the 20-minute first 5.